Hi, I'm Frank Jernigan, also known as Franco, and I'm the developer of the website franco.com with the unusual spelling that you see on the screen before you. I've done an experiment this week to try to determine the most invisible way to do body shaping increases down the side of a sweater. Of course, this could also be used for body shaping skirts or even sleeves if you're doing them bottom up. But the idea was to work out how a person could do increases and make them as invisible as possible. So we're not looking for increases that are a design element, but one that simply doesn't draw attention to itself. There are several different ways to do increases that would be completely acceptable. I have chosen the three that I think are the best. I have knitted swatches showing all three of them, and I will be discussing the differences between them and how the best way to work those increases into a section where you are increasing the shape, the size, or the circumference of a sweater or a skirt. So let's take a look at the swatches. The first swatch, I used the make one left and make one right. This is a perfectly fine increase for doing body shaping. Many people use it all the time. I've used it frequently myself for various reasons when I want a fairly invisible increase. As you see, the lines of the increases are relatively straight, though there's a little bit of jig-jagginess here. The increases are right here. Here's two of them. This one is the make one right on that side. Then I knitted a stitch in between and I did a make one left. You'll notice in the other swatches, I put the two increases right next to each other, but that's not possible with make one left and make one right because they would both then be in the strand between the same two stitches, so that just doesn't work. So I put one stitch in between them, and I put 4 of such increase rows in this swatch, as I did all of them. And as you can see, there is some visual disruption, not a lot, but just some, where the stitches take this odd shape where they cross. And I will show you in a little bit. I will have photos of these so you can freeze frame your video and take a really close look at them. But that is the make one increase. The next increase we looked at was the lifted increase, which many people prefer over the make one left and make one right, and I have to say it does a better job in my estimation as well, especially on the left side where the right lifted increases were made. The lines come in smoothly, they end, there's no real abrupt disruption of the line. Unfortunately, on the right hand side there are these gaps or misshaped stitches. There's nothing I was able to do to make those shape like the other ones, and I believe that ultimately it was because of the spin of the yarn. It tends to just make the one on the right more prominent. But this is a perfectly fine shaping increase, as you can see. You could put that down the sides of your sweater and no one would ever notice the stitches where the increases occurred. There's nothing that draws your attention to them. However, I did come across another increase that I wanted to try, and I think it actually does a better job than that. This increase is first described in June Hemmons Hyatt's Principle of Knitting. It is I call it the slip lifted increase, and she describes it on page 210 of the Principles of Knitting, and she calls it the slip raised increase. It's exactly like the lifted increase, which she calls, by the way, the raised increase. It's like the lifted increase, but instead of knitting the stitch that you are lifting the increase out of, you simply slip that stitch. That's the only difference in the two increases. I'll demonstrate that later in the video. As you can see in this swatch, the lines are even less disrupted than in the lifted increases without slipping. I am just really blown away by how wonderfully these invisibly disappear into the center stitch. I did do one more experiment where I placed these increases one stitch apart, in part to compare them to the make one left, make one right, but also just to see how that compared to this swatch. And here is that swatch. I like this best of all. There is one column of stitches that goes perfectly straight up the middle, and it anchors the side of your sweater or your skirt, and the other stitches just disappear into that column of stitches. I just think this is a wonderful way to do body shaping, and I will use it for any body shaping I do in the future, if ever. And one more comparison. I had what I thought was a really bright idea that I even mentioned to a few people, and it turns out not to be the best solution. And that is, instead of putting the increases next to each other on the same row, I alternated them. I first did one on the right, and then on the left, and then on the right, and then on the left, and then on the right, and then the left. And this was the result. You know, just don't pay any attention to the fact that this was done on a size 8 needles and the other swatches were done on size 6. The result would be the same on size 6, and that is you lose that beautiful straight line of the center coming down through it. That line wiggles back and forth very slightly as you alternate sides of the increases. And maybe you like that better, maybe you don't. I kind of like it the way they just disappear into one column of straight stitches. This might in fact be even less visible because the wavy lines don't draw attention to the straight line down the middle. So that's, as all of this is, it's all your choice. I'm just showing you the results, and you can decide which one works best for you. I'll now show you some pictures of those swatches, those very same swatches, and I want you to be able to see these swatches up close. So I have a picture and a close-up of each one. I won't spend a lot of time on these, but you can freeze your video at any point to take a closer look at them. This, of course, is the make one left, make one right. Here's a close-up of those. Here is the lifted increase. Here is a close-up of the lifted increase. Here is the slip lifted increase on the right and the left, and a close-up of that swatch. Here is the slip lifted increase with one stitch in between, and a close-up of that swatch. And just for comparison, here is the swatch that I did alternating left and right on different rows all the way up. So those are the swatches I'll tell you what my own conclusion is. So my conclusion is that the best alternative for me is the slip lifted increase where both the right and the left are on the same row. I put the left lifted increase on the right side, and I put the right lifted increase after I've knitted the center stitch. Both of them are the slip lifted increases, even though I didn't call them that when I just said it. But that's what my choice would be. But as I said, your results may vary, and it may in fact vary with the yarn that you choose to use. So I would suggest swatching and checking the look and seeing which one gives you the look that you appreciate and choose that one. But now I know which one I'm going to use for the future. And now let's take a look at how to work the slip lifted increase. We'll assume that this is the side of your sweater or your skirt where you're trying to do or want to do body shaping, increasing the circumference. I'm also going to assume you're knitting in the round, and there will be all knit stitches, though there's not much difference if you're knitting and then following it by a purl. We will do the increases on the knit side if you are doing that. So the first thing is to knit up to one stitch before the marker, and we're going to put increases on both sides of the marker with one stitch in between. We come up to the one stitch before the marker, and instead of working that stitch, we simply slip it. This is to do a left lifted slipped increase. We then pick up the stitch that is below the stitch on the left needle. So you come in from behind like that and pick up the stitch below, and we knit that stitch through the back loop. Slip the marker, knit one stitch in between the two stitches, and then we work a lifted increase on the right side. We lift it, we pick up that stitch by inserting it beneath the next stitch on the needle, pulling up, put that on the needle, and we knit that stitch. And instead of knitting the next stitch as we do with the lifted increase, we are going to slip that stitch. Both of the slip stitches are slipped purlwise. And then we can continue working the row or the round. On the next round, you just need to be aware that the increased stitch and the stitch you increased it out of are going to be very close to each other on the needle. And so you want to make sure you work them as two separate stitches, not as one stitch. And that would be true whether you're knitting or purling on your next row. So I made it so that I can knit the next row by moving to the other end of these double pointed needles or circular needles, and I come up to the increased stitch. You see they're very close together. I just make sure I knit them as two separate stitches like that. Slip the marker, knit the stitch in between, and there again they are very close together, so I knit them separately. Just like that. And that's how you work the slip lifted increase with one stitch in between. You do the left lifted increase before the marker, knit one stitch, and then do the right lifted increase after the marker. I hope you enjoy it. Happy knitting.